Good evening. Black Friday always has been etched in the minds of Australians. Those two words are synonymous with the bushfire horror past generations have faced. In New South Wales, on January the 7th, 1994, a new generation stood the test of yet another Black Friday, and this is their story.
Like a sparking fuse, New South Wales burned towards Black Friday. For days, more than 100 fires scorched the state. From the far north to the far south, volunteers fought to contain the flames. By Thursday, 3 people had died in the battle. A number of houses were lost. Sydney was ringed by fire. Evacuations by road, air and sea underway.
Can we get a car? Quick! Can we get a car? Can we get a car, please? Yeah, you hurry, come on.
With hot, dry winds and soaring temperatures feeding the inferno, firefighters were losing the unequal struggle, and on Friday, the long-feared explosion came. A fire in the Lane Cove National Park broke free of the bush, and Sydney's leafy green north burned black. Houses engulfed in Marsfield, West Lindfield and West Killara.
Leave that, it's gone! Come on, wasting the time.
Why don't you use the pool? I want the pumps in the pool, for Christ's sake.
They haven't got any pumps. We've got no fire brigade here on site.
You! Get out of there! Now!
Sorry.
You can see it starting on the hill over near Macquarie University a couple of hours ago, and it's just the winds have been in the wrong place. So this is where it's come to.
Let's go.
In a bad way. It's going to get worse, Charlie.
Hundreds ran for their lives as others stayed to fight. Friends, neighbours and strangers working together to save homes.
What? Yeah, I'm right. In the shade? Get him in water. Let's get him in the shade, please.
Get the cars out, Dad.
Got a wife somewhere.
Right.
Got a wife somewhere.
At Menai, Warranora and Bangor to the south, the city also burned.
As soon as that wind changed, it just came over and it took about 3 or 4 houses like that. It was just gone in minutes. I got out with the kids just.
The speed of the firestorm has horrified everybody. Dozens of homes have been destroyed, including that belonging to Olympic spokesperson Tanya Blanco.
To the west, the Blue Mountains were in flames, a wide front bearing down on homes, cutting roads and communications.
Across the north line of road is now on the grey side. Perhaps we could try and hit it with a water bucket.
Conditions are far too dangerous for a direct firefighting effort. Emergency workers are concentrating on trying to save property.
As night fell, exhausted firefighters were facing a grim weekend, the words of Emergency Services Minister Terry Griffiths ringing in their ears.
We've probably got several thousand houses under risk, and if I could say to you in the next 72 hours, if we only lose 2,000 or 3,000 houses, we'll be doing very well.
John Gatfield with that summary of Australia's modern-day Black Friday. From Melbourne now, and David Johnston joins us. And David, as we well know, many bushfires, including those of Ash Wednesday, have burned their way into the list of great Australian disasters.
Yes, Anne, the southern states of Australia have really suffered over the years, but as the news stories in these archives show, the threat to life and property by bushfire is probably the most dramatic common danger faced by all Australians. In fact, it's a danger that helps to pull us together as a nation. And whenever serious fires break out, there is always one common yardstick, and that is Black Friday.
As war clouds thickened over Europe, Another cloud was spreading over New South Wales and Victoria. A dense flame-flecked cloud from bushfires, climaxing the worst heat wave in the history of both states.
In the week of January 10 to 16, 1939, Australia was on fire. Townships were being wiped out by bushfires in Tasmania, South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. In that week, the worst in Australia's history, 116 people died in New South Wales alone. And on one day, 71 people were burnt to death in Victoria. That day was Friday the 13th, the now infamous Black Friday.
Experienced firefighters in the big timber country waged a losing battle against overwhelming odds and fought in vain to save homes and townships.
You could hear the fire roaring coming over the mountains and jumping from one spur to another. Never believed that anything like that could happen.
There was a tremendous wind. It swirled in and lit the whole place up.
Australia's bushfire history is a tragic record of similar disasters with regular loss of life. 1851, 10 dead. 1926, 32 die at New G in Victoria. 1938, fires in nearly every suburb of Sydney. 1944, 51 die in Victoria. Then in 1967, 62 people lose their lives as fires strangle Hobart. 1,400 homes go up in flames. 1968, 14 die in the Blue Mountains. 1969, 15 at Lara in Victoria. But worse is still to come. Then, after years of fuel build-up, we arrive at Wednesday, February the 16th, 1983. After an 18-month drought, it's a day of 45-degree heat and searing winds in Victoria and South Australia. It is Ash Wednesday. Streams of eucalyptus gas shot ahead of the flames, spontaneously igniting into giant fireballs, which exploded hundreds of yards in advance of the fire. 72 people die in Victoria and South Australia, and thousands more are left homeless. And the stories that survivors told 11 years ago, or even 54 years ago, could have been recorded in Sydney last week. So similar are their horrifying accounts of screaming winds and fickle flames.
And all the buildings around were on fire, and the bridge was on fire, so much so that the tar was dripping onto our blankets.
We couldn't believe we were still alive, and the fire went roaring away down the gully behind us. Just flame, mate, that you wouldn't believe.
And that's the point. Australia and California are the two worst areas in the world for these sorts of fires. And that will never change. So, Anne, all we can ever do is be as prepared as possible to fight these disasters because, as history shows, they will happen again.
Yes, indeed, David. And in fact, for the past 6 days, virtually all that has stood between the fires and a greater disaster has been a line of volunteers. Their story is next.
An invitation.
There was no let-up in darkness. Saturday began as Friday had finished. The northern beach suburbs now felt the heat. Houses destroyed at Akuna Bay, Bayview and Ingleside.
It's a scene being repeated throughout Sydney today, a wall of flame bearing down on houses. All firemen can do is stand and wait and hope they can push it back.
The flames leapt out of the Ku-ring-gai National Park and into the suburbs. Terry Hills was evacuated. Bewildered elderly patients bussed to safety.
And how are they coping? Probably better than the staff. It's pretty frightening for them, though. Yeah, it is. But as you can see, they're coping all right. We've got a good bunch of staff. The volunteers have been excellent. Local community people have rolled up to help. It's been really good.
The fires licked at new homes. The people it had left in its path relived a nightmare.
We went next door to get the neighbours out, tell them to get going. They got out and we couldn't get out. So we got into the car, threw the dog in the car, and the back end of the car melted. We got into the train and just a fireball hit us just like that, and we couldn't believe it. And then the back end of the train totally exploded, and then we jumped out of the train, jumped into the swimming pool, and they cleaned it yesterday as well. and just fireballs just going right through the bush, just straight over our heads.
At Eleanora Heights, the wind strengthened. More homes were lost. To the west, the Blue Mountains watched and waited for the inevitable. The fire started on Friday. It was moving swiftly.
It all depends to the wind, what way it comes. But if we get the westerlies, we're in for it.
By late afternoon, firefighters were in a running battle on a 50-kilometre front.
I wouldn't worry about it, Barry. The winds are swinging this way, that way. It's anyone's guess what's going to happen. Everyone's been evacuated. It's actually 5 o'clock in the afternoon now. You'd think it was at midnight. There's just no light. It's been covered by smoke.
Despite the heat, the smoke, the wind, firefighters managed to save these homes, but down the road, 4 were lost.
Get out and get back.
To the south, and the afternoon winds brought disaster.
Who's got a hose, Dave? Who's got a hose?
Burning embers ignited dozens of spot fires at Como, Illawong, Menai and Janali.
About 10 minutes ago, the people fled this house. Now it's suddenly caught on fire. You can see their washings going up in flames. Very shortly, the whole house will go up. There's nothing anyone can do. There's no fire engines around here. They're all being used. We've just had to drop what they were even trying to take out of the house and run for their lives.
Absolute devastation. It's like something out of Apocalypse Now. It's incredible. In 30 years, I've never seen anything like it. It's just like a scorched earth policy.
More than 80 homes were burnt to the ground, and a woman died as she fled, her 2 children badly burnt. As night fell, firefighters could only pray for a change in the weather.
Throughout Saturday, as the crisis deepened, reinforcements from all over Australia were in the thick of the battle. Ordinary men and women helping their fellow Australians. At the front line, numerous tales of individual courage. Sean Murphy tells some of them.
You're putting your life and you're trusting your life to your teammates.
The firestorms actually turn white hot, and nothing living can survive that.
We lost a couple of houses and lost a life, unfortunately.
Yeah, Chief said when he was seeing off some of our crews, it's like seeing the troops off to go to World War II or World War I.
The similarities with wartime don't end with this sort of devastation. Men and women from all over Australia in the past weeks have answered a call to stand side by side and fight a common foe. In fact, it's the embodiment of the great Anzac spirit.
To see a neighbouring state in trouble, this is why I wish the politicians in states, and I suppose I shouldn't be saying this, but I wish they'd stop fighting one another over little things and be like the brigades from all over Australia. New South Wales is in trouble, brothers, sisters, whatever you like to call them, and we've answered the call.
Right now, come on!
Ordinary Australians thrown together under extraordinary circumstances. Strangers bonded by a common purpose.
We're trained to work together. It's as simple as that. You might know the bloke, and I never met him before. I was up at Grafton, and there was 5. I never know. We worked like we knew each other for most of our lives.
Volunteers Howard Noakes, Peter Gaunt and Steve Wilson were among the first to fight a massive forest fire at Grafton on the north coast, even before the new year had dawned. A fire which claimed the life of one firefighter, highlighting the dangers faced at the front.
Yeah, all you can into it, and hopefully it's good enough. And hopefully everybody takes all the precautions and safety and that, and you'll all end up alive.
So far, 2 volunteers have sacrificed their lives, but there have been many close calls.
The coupling's off hoses, but that's all that's left of them. The radiated heat that travelled ahead of it just absolutely ignited them and melted them to nothing.
It was a firestorm, went straight over the top of it. We had our hoses out on the road and they just melted. No flames touched them. If you stand there, that's what happened to you.
So you must have been absolutely terrified.
It was scary. Scariest thing I've ever seen.
In all, 18,000 men and women from every state and territory have survived hellish conditions, many of them needing treatment for smoke inhalation and eye damage. 23-year-old Michael Berridge, an electrician from country South Australia, is just one.
Well, the fireball went over us and it took approximately about 5 minutes. In that time there was a lot of choking smoke and crews on the back, of which I was one of them. It got to the stage where we had to go inside the truck cabs. But of course I'd taken in too much smoke because it was very choking and I had to be taken out to hospital.
The bushfire crisis has awakened painful memories for some of the volunteers, veterans of Ash Wednesday.
We had them go over the top and they just sounded like an express train coming through and there was no warning.
Task Force leader Ian Taverner says the last week has been the hardest of 28 years in the field.
You wonder whether you've covered all bases, you know. Did you allow for anything unusual? Because it doesn't matter how well you plan, you can never plan for everything.
Among the volunteers, more than 100 professionals from metropolitan Melbourne, the biggest contingent ever sent interstate.
Sure, we're professional firefighters, but there's people up here, volunteers, that have far more experience in fighting this type of fire than what we do. So we listen to them and we take their advice and their guidance and assist where we can.
An attitude of support and cooperation that will beat Australia's latest peacetime crisis, an effort extending beyond the front line.
People around here are fantastic. I mean, they throw food at us. We've got so much to eat, and you know, you drive past them, they clap us and they yell out thank you and everything.
Yeah, we'd like to thank them as well for giving us the support.
You deserve our greatest thanks. Coming up, the human cost of the disaster.
48 years. I've never seen it like this before, ever in my life. Just to see it all go within an hour. I just don't believe what I see. I really don't believe it.
Sunday brought cooler weather and a chance to establish backburns, but freakish winds continued to plague firefighters.
The choking smoke proved too much for several firefighters. There were anxious moments too when a water tanker was ringed by flames. It escaped, so too did the historic house.
How close was it?
Close enough.
Right? Come from nowhere, didn't it?
Just out of nowhere, straight over the top. There's people still at their homes in there and they're just peeking out.
Further north, the flames were sweeping through bush and orchards towards the tiny community of Bilpin in the lower Blue Mountains.
There are helicopters presently on the ground evacuating people from the homes that are in the way of the fire, and the others are trying to water bomb to control it from getting through to the homes.
At Beacon Hill in Sydney's north, the Ku-ring-gai National Park reignited. In its path, Belrose. There, homeowners prepared for the worst, while elderly residents from retirement homes were evacuated out of harm's way. Still further north at Gosford, fire continued to threaten homes throughout the day.
Sorry, okay, we've been asked to evacuate this whole area, at least down to McDonald.
By lunchtime, steadily increasing winds fanned embers and the hills of Carryong reignited.
There's plenty of fuel still around, the fire keeps flaring up, and it's a problem they just have to keep coming back to.
The main highway from Gosford to Sydney remained blocked, thousands waiting out the flames. On the water, a Sydney Harbour Jetcat ran a shuttle service to bring stranded holidaymakers home.
The freeway and the trains are still blocked, so we heard that the Jetcat was going today, but we're trying to get back on that.
To the south, more evacuations, this time the town of Waterfall.
Residents had to grab what they could and get out.
A bit concerned, and we loaded all our equipment in as quick as we could to get away from the place. That was all. We packed early because we could see it coming.
Besieged firefighters once more awaited the flames.
The fires jumped the road.
in the railway line down there, and at the moment it's just burning through the bush at a pretty fast rate.
But this time, they were allowed a break from the battle, fire breaks slowing and finally stalling the blazes' onslaught. As darkness arrived, statewide the situation was still critical, with 135 fires burning, but there was growing confidence that if the weather stayed cool, volunteers might get the upper hand.
Well, by Sunday, the cost was clearly evident. The death toll, thankfully, small, but the human toll, enormous. People displaced, their most precious possessions lost forever. John Hill has that story.
The fires affected almost everyone living in Sydney and right along the New South Wales coastline. More than 180 families lost their homes and all their possessions. Tens of thousands were evacuated as fire fronts ran out of control. Entire communities forced to run for their lives. Family members became separated from each other. Evacuees often spent hours not knowing if their homes or loved ones were safe. Thousands more couldn't make it home when walls of flame cut highways and rail links. Everywhere there was fire and fear. The worst property losses were at Como West in Sydney's southern suburbs, where 87 homes burned. The flames swept through the treetops at astonishing speed, driven by a firestorm which gave firefighters no chance to rally reinforcements.
I've been in the area 48 years. I've never seen it like this before, ever in my life. It's just unbelievable. Seeing people pack up and leave and just leave all their possessions behind, and just to see it all go within an hour. Oh, I just don't believe what I see. I really don't believe it.
Most managed to escape before the flames hit, but some chose to stay and fight. Among them, Philip and Barbara Moore, who were inside their home hoping the wall of flame would pass by, but it didn't.
And the glass just started imploding in. We were in the bathroom on the floor. We had wet towels over our heads. My brother said we better get out. He did a quick reconnoitre over to that side. The stairs were on fire. We couldn't get out there. He came over here. This house was still standing. It was just a bit smoky. He said we should try for there, so he got us out of the bathroom, across through what was the front door just here. We ran. I said to my wife, who was still crawling at that stage to get under the smoke, run, just run, and she ran. All of us ran into the front steps up there, tried the front door and it was open. I just couldn't believe it.
The intense heat consumed homes at random. Some left standing, while just next door they burnt to the ground.
Everything that sort of revolves around your life is just sort of shattered. It's an amazing feeling, really.
People here will rebuild the houses and replace furniture, but it's the sentimental things the Moores will miss, like mementos recalling their children's early years.
The things that they'd done at kindergarten, the handprints, the footprints, you know, the messages to Daddy when they were little. Those things are gone, you know.
But the Moores did have the foresight to take family photo albums out of the house the night before. As the terrible clean-up continues and those worst affected try to understand what's happened to them, they're finding comfort in the support being given by family and friends. In many ways, the bushfires have had the effect of bringing communities closer together. But psychologists are warning that the sorts of trauma people have been through over the last 10 days or so could produce a whole range of anxiety reactions, particularly in children. The main reaction is likely to be shock. Some people will be able to deal with their fears and get on with their lives. Others will probably be coping quite well now, but go into depression at a later stage.
It's very possible that the intensity of the emotions that people will feel will be very frightening for them. It may be that they have not experienced ever before the type of loss, the type of grief that they're now going through. The thoughts, the feelings could be amazingly intense for people, and they need to understand that this is a normal reaction to a very, very abnormal event.
Now, if you'd like to help the victims of the bushfires, you can. The Sydney Lord Mayor's appeal is taking donations by phone, mail or in person. You can ring toll-free on 008 06 06 93, or you can post your donation to Box 1591, Sydney 2001, or your donation may be made at any branch of the Commonwealth Bank. Donations can also be left at the Sydney Town Hall. From the people who had lost everything, there were many questions. How did it happen, and was anyone to blame?
And then you come back to this and it's just devastating. It's devastating for everyone.
For the third successive night, angry tongues of flame leapt skyward from 3 separate places in the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney. Helicopters dumped thousands of litres of water onto hotspots. To the south, firefighters drew their line at the F6 freeway, taking advantage of a slight easing in the weather to do some back burning.
Going to start doing something shortly, we're going to have a problem here.
The fire did cross the highway barrier, but it burnt without the venom of earlier days. As the cost in lost property grew and grew, the Prime Minister announced a boost in emergency relief for the victims, the cash grant lifting to $2,000.
This payment's not income tested or asset tested. It's only on the basis of whether their homes have been damaged or destroyed, whether they have suffered material income loss in the course of the fire or fighting the fire.
On the city's south, with the immediate terror eased, people returned to the charred shells of their homes and started the long process of rebuilding.
We crossed the border from Yugoslavia to Italy with the guns in the back, but we wasn't so afraid like that.
But in the midst of the sadness, at least a trace of joy. David Matthews lost his home to the flames, but in the rubble, a small treasure in a scorched steel box.
Look, there's me ounce of gold and me half a kilo of silver and all the coins and all the burnt paper underneath. But at least I got it back. It's all there.
With firefighters breathing a little bit easier by Monday, many were asking the question, just how well prepared were we? There were other questions as well, as David Richardson discovered.
And then you come back to this and it's just devastating. It's devastating for everyone.
We've been trying to establish a fire break here, and but unfortunately it's come too late. There should have been a lot of back burning done here a long, long time ago.
And yeah, we can't do anything about this. It's gone.
The shock is starting to wear off, and it's being replaced by anger and hurt. Victims of the 1994 Sydney bushfires are pointing fingers and asking questions about these fires, the causes, and this state's preparedness.
I just don't know why.
Perhaps there isn't an answer to that question.
Well, this was a freak fire. First time this has happened in 200 years, and none of the measures we put in place could stop this fire, unfortunately.
Fire Resources Officer Rob Mather should know. His council, Ku-ring-gai, was the first in Sydney hit by the bushfires, and months of hazard burn-off had no effect.
Still didn't make any difference? Didn't make any difference. Areas that were burnt 2 years ago, it ripped through.
Ku-ring-gai spends $500,000 a year in hazard reduction, but nothing could prepare officers for this firestorm.
This fire has basically rewritten the textbooks. All the precautions that we took, a lot of them didn't help.
All the Sydney fires were man-made, the work of firebugs. Many were started in national parks despite the parks being closed from day one, despite extensive hazard burn-off programs in all national parks.
We have done perhaps more than our share of controlled burning.
National Parks Chief Dr Neil Shepherd has rejected criticism of his department in the wake of the fires. He points to other factors in the control of fires, namely equipment and resources.
Obviously the National Parks and Wildlife Service would like more resources, so would everybody else.
And there's another side to this coin. Too much burn-off is as bad as too little.
But too frequent burning or unseasonal burning can in fact distort the vegetation pattern
and make it much more fire prone.
The conservation watchdog, the National Parks Association, believes the whole community is to blame.
There were insufficient precautions taken, insufficient awareness, and as a veteran of the 1983 Ash Wednesday in South Australia, I've been quite surprised at some of the cavalier attitudes to fire in this state.
Then there's the question of urban sprawl in our bushland. Another serious issue now facing Sydney councils is its future building practices. This is what's called a spur development. It's a line of homes on a ridge overlooking a valley of bushland. Conservationists call this type of development a death trap. Sydney councils will now have to decide in the wake of this fire whether they can allow this type of development to go on in the future. And if they do, what kind of measures will be needed to keep these homes safe?
People who are living in those sorts of areas are extremely vulnerable, and not all of them knew and had taken the appropriate precautions.
There's a simple solution, a total ban on homes in some bush areas. It's a view held by some councils.
The spur development regulations haven't been strong enough, and houses have been able to be built right next to slopes that just can carry the wildfire straight up and into the houses.
For many of the questions, there simply aren't any answers, like what makes people light killer fires. Other questions will never be answered because of buck passing and endless red tape. Perhaps the state inquiry into the bushfires, promised by the government, will provide some clues on how to stop this disaster happening yet again. Do you think it could happen again, Rob?
Of course, if it's happened once, it can happen again.
In a moment, what worked and what didn't. How technology stood up to the test.
Tuesday dawned cooler, and fire crews breathed more easily. After so many hard days of desperate defence, they went on to the offence in the Blue Mountains. Heavy earth-moving equipment extended two so-called black lines, scorched earth buffers, between the fires and residential areas.
And I think this is a classic example of what should have been done a few winters ago.
By this time, more than 20,000 firefighters were rotating through the fire fronts. Although there were still more than 100 separate fires burning, the threat was greatly reduced. At St Ives, one flare-up. Residents were warned to prepare their homes, but they were allowed to stay put as 15 crews tackled and eventually overcame the outbreak. To the south, all fires were contained. The Royal National Park, little more than an ashen desert. Of the thousands of animals known to have been in the park, only 5 had been found, according to State Environment Minister Chris Hartcher. But at least the nearby town of Heathcote had been saved.
So as Tuesday closed and the danger continued to ease, what had we learned from this latest trial by fire? Could it have been fought better? Was the equipment up to the task? Lincoln Howes has been looking for answers.
No community can be expected to gear up for a worst case scenario which may or may not happen during any one lifetime.
We were staring down the barrel of a catastrophe the other day, 72 hours ago, where on the best advice available to me as Minister, we had 10,000 houses under direct threat.
Sydney emerged from the Holocaust of last weekend, some to count the cost, but most to marvel that it hadn't been higher.
But these firefighters, they need a medal.
What, they saved your house?
Yep, they saved their house.
God bless everybody.
With the respite came the chance for firefighters to regroup and review, to take stock of the efforts that had won them the respect and gratitude of a nation. Already, though, that brave campaign has come under the microscope. Could it have been done better or even avoided altogether?
There is a tendency to say, we've always had it, we've always done it this way, it works out okay. And there hasn't been the realisation got through to people that really we can save so much trauma. We can save so much loss. We can save so much of our national asset by doing it better.
I want no recriminations at the end of this. I want a constructive, positive approach to how we improve what we do.
Emergency Services Minister Terry Griffiths defends the decision to fight a conventional campaign. The highest technology used, helicopters, with minimal success.
Slow as you can go, slow as you can go.
The helicopter will come in from time to time, but by the time it drops its bucket of water on the fires, it evaporates almost before it hits the fire. So a lot of your effort is wasted.
Bill Osborne is co-director of a Victorian company urging Australian firefighters to move on to more modern methods, specifically the Canadian-built CL-215 fire bomber.
With three CL-215s, when the fires first started, it would have stopped them dead.
So we wouldn't have had the tragedy we've had?
No, we wouldn't.
The planes, used extensively in Canada, Europe and parts of Asia, can pick up 6 tons of water in 10 seconds and make up to 30 dumps an hour at the heart of a fire.
They could, with the closeness of water bodies nearby, have dropped 20 tonne of water in front of the line of fire within an hour. Now that water is loaded with fire retardant and it would have killed the fire as it came.
It's important that we don't react in an emotive manner to what has been an unusual event.
The man entrusted with defending Sydney against the latest onslaught, bushfire chief Phil Koperberg, says CSIRO research found fire bombers unsuitable for Australian conditions.
The system was not found to be effective in our particular topography, with our particular weather, with our particular vegetation.
Not until the final ember is doused and the threat is truly gone will the lessons learned from this firestorm be examined and perhaps acted upon. But according to Emergency Services Minister Terry Griffiths, everything is under review.
I have indicated to all of my commissioners that when they approach this analysis, it will be a blank page approach. Disregard what laws exist, disregard what regulations exist, disregard what custom and practice is or procedures, and start from scratch if they have positive suggestions to make on how we can do it better.
Well, when we return, rebuilding and regrouping after the inferno.
Throughout the night and into the day, backburning in the Blue Mountains continued. Volunteers reluctant to claim victory over a fire proving unpredictable. To the north, another national park near Gosford was alight. The full resources of firefighting power turned to that battle.
A fire burning on a 100-kilometre front is expected to join the Colo and Wollombi fires, forming the biggest single fire in the state in 50 years, stretching over 350,000 hectares.
Closer to Sydney, work continued on bringing normal life back to smouldering suburbs. Workers made safe trees along major roads, cutting away weakened branches in danger of falling on traffic. Burnt power poles were being replaced, 30,000 homes still without electricity. But to the south, at least, the fires were beaten, leaving time to reflect on a firestorm many had predicted, but few would have imagined.
Wednesday today, and the tension continues to ease, but for the people who have lost everything, the battle is only just beginning. Greg Quayle joined some of the Sydney-siders who are starting to rebuild their shattered lives.
Victoria and South Australia, 1983. It's Wednesday, Ash Wednesday. It remains the worst fire disaster in Australian history. But today, the once blackened land is revitalised. Communities again thrive.
There's always life at the end of the tunnel. I'm back on my feet now. It's taken a while, but I got there.
Those who made it through Ash Wednesday will tell you, to survive, you have to be positive.
Even though it took a few weeks for the first sprig of green leaf to come back, it'll come back. It'll take time, but it will come back.
The fires of '83 will be remembered for their horrific death toll. This time, much fewer lives were lost, but the land has been equally devastated. More often than not, it's true what they say. Time heals all wounds. But you've got to ask yourself, how would you handle this? One day you could have everything, the next you could have nothing. Absolutely nothing. Chances are, though, that you'd probably react just like the people here in Como West, where 87 houses were destroyed in less than 1 hour. You'd probably just start again. You'd help each other out, you'd regroup, and you'd rebuild. There's no stopping human spirit. From the moment the embers were cool, came a new start. Everyone is pitching in. The unions have organised emergency clean-up crews. Unemployed men who just want to help.
All getting together and starting to pull together and make something out of nothing.
Well, almost nothing. Some have found a few odds and ends, but they're good only for the memories.
I don't know. There's a spoon there. That's one of those.
That's one of a
lovely
presentation.
Lovely
spoon.
spoons.
I wonder what
There's the cap off it.
It's sad but true. Sometimes it takes a tragedy to bring out the best in people, and that's what's happening here. The generosity has been stunning. The fires left this couple with nothing but the clothes donated by strangers.
Very good of them. I'd like to tell you what I've got. I've even got new shoes on.
New shoes? Look at that.
Brand spanking new shoes.
Stepping out shoes.
Yeah.
The blue one, I think.
You like the blue one, do you? Well, I'm allowed to take the 3.
Oh, you get 3?
I can have as many as I like.
Oh, lucky you.
But it's no good taking too many, is it?
And then there's the financial help. Sydney's Lord Mayor Frank Sartor has set up a relief fund. In 3 days, it's raised $4 million. The money and time together eventually will heal the wounds. This disaster, what does it tell you about Australians and the Australian spirit?
Well, I think it tells us that we're fighters, but Australians are good mates, that mateship lives on very strong, because Australians will always rally to a good cause, and especially if it concerns each other. So, I mean, I'm quite proud of being a Sydney-sider and, in fact, being an Australian, because people do help each other. They do care, and if there's a genuine cause, the good old mateship lives on. It's very strong.
Early estimates put the damage bill at more than $110 million. The rebuild is already underway, but when the physical scars are banished from the landscape, the memories will linger on. And if we're to minimise future fire disasters, that is a good thing. Good night.
5 o'clock in the afternoon now, you'd think it was at midnight. It's just not. Get out of there! Now!
The firestorms actually turn white hot, and nothing living can survive that.
But the wind has taken its changed direction, and I've just lost my farm shed.
It's a scene being repeated throughout Sydney today, a wall of flame bearing down on houses.
People are being evacuated as we speak. Families are running for shelter, running for their lives. Is your mother in there?
Got to get out of the unit. It's about to go up.
Don't care about the house once I get some things out for the kids.
Leave that, it's gone.